Hello, hello, all you lovely people. Professor Gray here with the first of three, count them, three modules on the relationship between God and religion, or morality and religion. God and religion, that would be pretty obvious. Morality and religion, that's what we're going to talk about. I know, 3 modules on this, because after all, a majority of people on this planet probably believe that there is a very important relationship between God and morality. And so we're going to talk about this. And to get us started, just a little story. So imagine that tonight you're woken up by God, of all people. Yes, and God is there, and God says, you, because God has to have a crazy voice, right? You, Professor Gray's student, you must sacrifice to me the thing you value the most. And that, of course, is the person you love the most. And God goes on to instruct you to take this person. It could be your mother, your father, a brother, a sister, a child, a best friend, a spouse, a lover, whoever it is. And God says to you, take them to Delaware Park, and with this knife, sacrifice their lifeblood to me, your Lord and Creator. I know, pretty crazy, right? Happens to me once in a while, too. No, not really. And so they say this to you and then vanish, of course, before you can ask any questions of God. And so what do you do? The practical question, right? What ought I do when confronted with a command like that from God itself? And we've, of course, seen when answering the practical question, we've started fairly straightforward, I guess, with these relativistic approaches that would tell you what you ought to do, do whatever society says if you're the cultural relativist, or do whatever your feelings say, follow your heart if you're the moral subjectivist. But today we're going to look at a different answer. Is what we ought to do what God commands, even if it involves sacrificing the life of another. And is that a good answer? Do what God commands. The readings for today, challenge that idea that what God commands is what constitutes morality. And we'll start with the first of these readings on this topic, which is the Euthyphro. It's a great little dialogue written by Plato. I've just given you maybe the first 2/3 of it. It's quite interesting. And this is a dialogue that takes place between, so it's written by Plato, takes place between Socrates, who was Plato's teacher in real life, and this guy named Euthyphro. Now, historians aren't quite sure if Euthyphro is a real person or if Plato just made up this guy for this dialogue. It's unclear. But the dialogue does take place in Athens. It takes place at the porch of the king Archon of Athens, and the king Archon's function, is it Archon or Archon? I don't know, maybe someone knows Greek. I'll say Archon. The king Archon's function is both as attorney general, that is the person who prosecutes crimes on behalf of the state, but also, it turns out, the head of religious affairs. And this is because the Athenians saw little difference between crimes that were done against the state and civil offenses between citizens. And along these lines, all wrongdoings had religious aspects. So again, there's no distinction between crimes done to the state versus crimes against citizen, and all of these had religious aspects. All crimes, all wrongdoings had some religious components. And so what is good, according to the state, is virtually identical to what is religious or what is holy or what is pious. And so obviously some big symbolism going on here, because again, we're going to have a discussion about what is holy and pious, but this is a location that sees that as equivalent to what is right and good. And as we develop this, we'll see why that's, this is, again, this equivalence between what is right and good being seen as the same as with what is religious or pious or holy. Now, Socrates is outside this king on this porch, I guess, and he's out there awaiting his trial. I don't know if you know much of this history of Socrates, but one of the accusations made against Socrates was that of impiety, that is, of violating religious standards. And spoiler alert, in real life, Socrates is found guilty of this crime and executed by the state for that crime. And we'll actually, I believe the last reading, we will look at his defense at this trial. But this is him outside before that trial happens. Of course, Socrates doesn't yet know what awaits him. Plato knows that we, the readers, will know because Plato wrote this well afterwards. So we do know why Socrates is there. Again, he's about to go on trial for corrupting the youth and impiety. So that's why Socrates is there, though. He doesn't know what's going to happen yet. Meanwhile, Euthyphro is there to prosecute his own father for murder. And Socrates, of course, is shocked at this. Socrates is like, you would take your own father to court? Because the punishment, if Euthyphro's father is found guilty for murder, would be execution. But the idea is why Socrates is shocked is that his father had murdered a slave or a hired hand. And the Greeks, that would not be a big deal. It would be much worse to prosecute one's own father, especially if the punishment was death. That would essentially be patricide. And I think when we're reading this, we are meant to think that either Euthyphro is either a zealot, who's just charging forward, doing this, or perhaps more subtly, perhaps Euthyphro really is there to prosecute his father so that Euthyphro can inherit his father's land and wealth. So anyhow, so Socrates, of course, says, whoa, you're gonna put your father on trial and the punishment's execution. And Euthyphro says, I am doing the right thing because what I am doing is the holy and pious thing to do. And so Socrates is like, oh, you must be a religious expert then to know such things. And Euthyphro is, of course, yes, I'm very humble, but of course I am an expert on holiness and piety. And so Socrates says, you must teach me because I am on trial for being impious. You will teach me how to be holy and pious, and then maybe I'll be innocent. And so Euthyphro says, sure thing, no problem. And so this dialogue turns around the question of what is holiness? Because the point is that Euthyphro says he will teach Socrates what it means, what is holiness. And then Socrates can say, oh, okay, I will show them you taught me. I'll be good from now on. And this is an incredibly rich dialogue with lots of interesting things going on, but I only have time to focus on a few things just for this class. But I hope you take a course on ancient philosophy if you're interested and read the whole thing. It is a very cool, fascinating dialogue. Anyhow, so the question is, what is holiness? Euthyphro makes his first definition. If you jump to page, 45? If you look right above 5e on page 45 in the dialogue, you get the first definition where Euthyphro says, well, I say that the holy is what I'm doing right now, prosecuting murder. And Euthyphro goes on to justify this by saying, look, that's what the gods Kronos and Zeus did. They killed their fathers because they saw their fathers as doing wrong. Now, Socrates doesn't like this example, or this definition, because he says, this is only an example. It is not a definition. Again, just to illustrate, if someone asks you to define a horse, you wouldn't say, there's a horse, Sally. Sally is a horse. There. Susie Q. Susie Q is a horse. There. Buster. Buster is a horse. There's your definition of horse. No, we'd be like, no, those are examples of horses, but I want to know what is a horse. You want something like, I just pulled this up, a large plant-eating domesticated mammal with solid hoofs and a flowing mane and tail. Maybe that's not the best definition, but that is certainly a definition. It's not an example. So again, Socrates doesn't like this first definition because it's not really a definition at all. It is just an example. And again, the definition of holiness, Socrates said, should establish the paradigm pattern of what makes something holy or not, because this is what allows us to spot whether something is unholy or not. Again, we could present an action or a thing, and the definition or the paradigm pattern of holiness would let us tell, oh yeah, that's holy, or no, that's not holy. Because the idea is once you grasp or understand this paradigm pattern, this real definition, once you do that, you can then spot the holy or unholy in new cases or situations. If I just give you an example, that doesn't help you with other new cases. That's the power of a good definition, is it allows us to spot new things. And similarly, if I show you just three pictures of horses, you don't really know what it is unless I tell you the definition. Then when you see a new animal, you would know, oh, that's a horse, or no, that's not a horse. So again, that's what a definition. A definition is not an example. It's something broader than that. So Euthyphro gets it, oh, I see what you're saying. And so we get Euthyphro's second definition. This is on page 46 at 7a. And also, please ignore the translator. I don't know why the translator decided to call what I'm about to say the first definition. No, it's obviously the second. I just told you what the first one was. It was those examples. Anyhow, so we're now doing the second definition. Just ignore the translator. So anyhow, at 7a, Euthyphro says that, quote, what is dear to the gods is holy. What is not dear to them is unholy. Now, Socrates is like, oh, very good. We have a definition now. Let's see if it's a good definition. And Socrates rejects this because he says, look, the gods can disagree about things. After all, death to Kronos, the god Kronos, is dear to Zeus because Zeus does kill Kronos. It's a funny little story I won't go into. But yeah, so death to Kronos is dear to Zeus. But hey, Kronos is a god, and that statement is definitely not dear to Kronos. Kronos is like, that's not dear to me. Don't kill me. That's not cool. So on the one hand, death to Kronos is dear to Zeus, but on the other hand, death to Kronos is not dear to Kronos. Therefore, death to Kronos is both holy and unholy. Socrates does not like that because he thinks holiness is supposed to be the opposite of unholiness. You can't have both holiness and unholiness at the same time. A definition should distinguish these. It would be like having a definition of horse that allowed a given animal to be both a horse and not a horse at the same time. That's not a very good definition. It's quite confusing. Yeah, so you'd say, look, we need a better definition. Let's get a new one. And so that's what Socrates does. Socrates says, look, let's have a definition that's clearly telling us what holiness is, but doesn't create these confusions where we can have the same thing be both holy and unholy at the same time. However, before we move on, I want to just note there is a very interesting discussion that happens here because we get a discussion from Socrates about different types of disagreements. He says, first of all, there can be disagreements about measurement, about weight, about those types of things. And he says, how do we resolve these? We get a rule or a scale or other scientific instrument to resolve the conflict. There's no need for any kind of physical violence to resolve things. We just get the instrument to settle it for us. But he notes that disagreements about justice, honor, and goodness, these seem to be different because there aren't scientific instruments to resolve disagreements about justice, honor, and goodness. And this is why we often see violence between people, or he says between gods, about such things. And we've seen this before. So it's actually where I stole it from, I won't lie. Now you know where Professor Gray steals. It's always from Plato. No, because this is just the normative descriptive distinction we talked about, right? The facts of weight measurement, those are the descriptive things we talked about before. And the values are the normative things, the disagreements about justice, honor, goodness. These are the value judgments, the normative claims. So again, we're seeing Socrates make that distinction between descriptive and normative claims, which we've talked about. And Socrates is also saying how we resolve the conflicts between these quite differently. If it's descriptive, we resolve these by, studying or using the tools of the sciences or whatever the discipline has to resolve those. But, we've already talked about this a lot in this class. There is no machine or tool to resolve conflict between values, between justice, claims of goodness, and morality. And so then Socrates does want us to wonder, is violence inevitable? And the good news is you already know Socrates' answer because we've been doing it so far. It's our good old friend. Oh, you're going to kill me. Moral reasoning. Yay, it comes back. Again, we employ an argument or a debate to find the answers. And indeed, Socrates' approach in this dialogue illustrates that. Socrates keeps wanting to make an argument to understand what it means for something to be holy. And so Socrates demands and presents arguments, not threats and violence. And as I've said, we've been seeing this all, so far all this semester, and we'll see it till the very end. Again, always in resolving normative disputes, we have to do arguments. There's no other tool available for us like there is for the sciences, say. So that's the idea. So now we can move along to Euthyphro's third definition. This is on at 9e on page 50. This is where Euthyphro says, the holy is what all the gods love, and the opposite, what all the gods hate, is unholy. So now you can see he's getting around that problem of disagreements between the gods. We'll just look on where there is agreement. That's what's going to determine what is holy and what is unholy. And now here's where things finally get a little bit interesting. Well, they've been interesting, I think, before. But anyway, we can switch this claim into a more contemporary statement about morality. Again, the original statement is what is holy is what all the gods love. And we can turn this into a statement about morality more generally. That is, what is moral and what is immoral is commanded by the God. Or by God, I guess. So what is moral and what's immoral is commanded by God. And this should look familiar to us because it's kind of similar to what we saw with moral relativism. It's kind of wild because now we're doing religion. What is moral and immoral is commanded by God. But notice how similar it is to moral relativism. So take cultural relativism. We would say what's moral and what's immoral is what is commanded by my culture or society. And then we could have ethical subjectivism, which would say what's moral and what's immoral is commanded by my personal attitudes and feelings. So moral relativism is telling us what's moral and immoral, commanded by either society or commanded by your own feelings. So what we're seeing today in this new module is what is moral is what's commanded by God. So now we have the religious version of relativism. So again, what we have now is what is moral and what's immoral is commanded by God. And so this religious idea is kind of a relativist view as well, because it's saying morality is relative to the commands of God. And this idea is known as divine command theory, that what is commanded by God is what's moral. God sets the rules. However, before we go into divine command theory, I think, we can take a stretch of the legs. We've already covered so much in the Euthyphro. We're already, boom, boom, 2, 3 definitions. Awesome. Let's take a quick break, stretch some legs, loosen up a bit. And then when we come back, we'll have a substitute teacher. It's our friend, Mr. Green. I love this guy. He's kind of snobby looking, but he's pretty smart, so he's cool. But he is only a mister. I got the PhD. So, but you probably like him more than me, don't you? Because he has all the cool graphics. No, I'm going to have Mr. Green, because this is actually a really good video. He's going to teach us all about divine command theory. He'll review a little bit of what I just said and then go on to some very interesting stuff. So yeah, Mr. Green, your favorite substitute teacher. But before we bring on Mr. Green to teach us a thing or two about divine command theory, take that break, then come back, be nice while I'm away, and treat Mr. Green with respect and listen to his little discussion on divine command theory, and then I'll come back and talk a bit more and maybe reveal some even deeper problems that he overlooks. But that's in a moment. See you in a bit.